From Fox 8 Sports, this is the Overtime Podcast.
From the Fox 8 studios in New Orleans, this is the Fox 8 Overtime Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Fazende, riding shotgun as he does each and every podcast. Is Andre Johnson
Jr.
Do not forget the Jr. It's very important to remember the JR at the end of the name. Before we get into today's content, be sure to like, share, rate, review. If you are watching us on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. Get the bell notification for when we drop that fire content. Also, hello to the Gulf Coast Sports Entertainment Network. Glad you have found us, original programming on this network. And we found out today, Andre, we've got a little bit of more original programming coming your way with the home of the NOLA Gold. Will be right here. Of course, the New Orleans rugby team. So all the rugby fans, welcome. Come on over to the Gulf Coast Sports Entertainment Network, which I know this is an organization you are near and dear to your heart because you were around them quite a bit last year.
Yeah, last year was fun. I mean, you know, they've been here for about 7 seasons now. Last year they made the playoffs for the first time in franchise history. And, you know, they said it best. New Orleans loves winners, and they want to be the spring sport that brings winners to the city of New Orleans. And hopefully they can do that. And they'll be doing it right here on the Gulf Coast Sports Network.
The NOLA Gold is in black and gold colors. We're going to talk about black and gold Saints today because that's what we do for the most part on this podcast. So it is Monday. Wild card weekend is coming gone. The Saints firmly entrenched in this head coaching search. We heard the names last week. Expect new names to leak this week. Names like Kingsbury, names like Brady, names like Kellen Moore. This will be their opportunity to get their first opportunity to interview virtually with the New Orleans Saints, and they can interview in person the first time January 20th. They've really somewhat complicated the process of hiring coaches. I don't know if it's good or bad, but nonetheless, it just kind of is what it is. So the Saints are certainly firmly entrenched in that. At the same time, Mickey Loomis met with us today to talk about the franchise he's been a part of for a long, long time, addressed a lot of different topics, spoke for a long time. It was a pretty typical Mickey Loomis press conference, especially if you've been around him a while and you've listened to him for a while. You know what I mean. But we got no choice. It's where we got to go with the big picture today because there was a few things that stood out, and I think we just got to share our insight into that.
Yeah, you know, Mickey Loomis, Saints general manager, talked for about 43 minutes today to the media, kind of capping off what's been a down season for the Saints. The good news is he was not chewing gum this time, no smacking gum in our ears for 43 minutes.
Yeah.
And then he went on to, you know, say a lot about the state of this organization, the future of this organization, why they were 5-12. And while he said a lot, there were a lot of things he didn't say as well, Sean. So as we both sat and listened to Loomis talk, let's start with you. What did you take away from his press conference?
Okay, well, first off, he talked for a while.
Yeah.
It was a long press conference, and it flowed. I mean, it wasn't like it was kind of boring. It kind of, I mean, there was a lot of things to address. So generally, when there's a lot of important things to address, it kind of flowed. But look, this is my 16th, 17th. I don't know how long I've been covering the team. End of year press conference with Mickey Loomis, and they all sound relatively the same, with the exception of last year when we had the gum chewing incident. But let's get into it. About 40 minutes, 43 minutes, as you said, to be exact, but per usual. It's Loomis, didn't really say too much. You know, Mickey has really, it's just a skill. I mean, I got to be honest, this is a skill. He has mastered the art of staying right in the middle and revealing just enough while at the same time revealing absolutely nothing about where he currently stands, where the organization currently stands. And you're really just left to decipher what he means when it comes to certain things. He did say, hey, look, we're 5-12. This is us. We are admitting we have a problem. We have to make changes. And he expressed optimism going forward. I did not feel that any kind of way when it comes to optimism or feel great about the state of the Saints after the press conference, just because it didn't really strike me that way. But I got to get this out of the way first. And this is not my big takeaway, but I just thought it was hysterical. The one thing Loomis did say that I couldn't help but laugh at was to look beyond the results.
Oh, he started with that.
The infamous quote, I just chuckled. I mean, of course, he had to know what he was doing right there. He had a little smile at the end. He didn't even change the wording. It was the exact same phrase, had a smile on his face. Look beyond the results. To be fair, now was the time to look beyond the results because you got to get back to winning. So you can't just say we lost. You got to figure out the reasons why. That's why you fired a head coach midseason, and that's why you're here in this predicament now. I just thought that was hilarious, regardless of what you think about that. Take that what you want from that. But like I said before, nothing really new or exciting to come out of this. Didn't expect a whole lot because it's just the way he does things when it comes to an end-of-year press conference. Thus, I'm not going to sugarcoat it and say, man, I feel good about where they stand. Everything is okay. Y'all know it's better than that. That's just not the way we operate, and it's not the tone he gave off. And I don't even think it was intention to give that off because it's just, like I said before, Mickey naturally, after a 13-3 season, he's a naturally middle-of-the-road guy. So after a 5-12 season, he's going to be the same way. So that's just him. Take it or leave it. But the one sliver of, I don't want to call it hope, I want to call it curiosity that stood out to me. I want to focus on the coaching search and how we were able to gather just a small little bit of intel on where things currently stand with Loomis's press conference today. He did say familiarity is not a qualification. It's also not a negative. Hire the best coach, blah, blah, blah. We understand that. We can get into specifics. We understand that. And we know coordinators from the wild card round can interview this week, as we mentioned, Cliff Kingsbury, Joe Brady, Kellen Moore, etc. By the way, Brady and Kingsbury, boy, did they put on a show Sunday. Both those guys really stood out to me. And I hope the Saints get all those interviews done out the way. Plus, old Mike McCarthy became available during the press conference. The word came out. But back to the original topic. What was that sliver of curiosity? Well, they're in the midst of this coaching search. And a little nugget of information that may not seem big on the surface, but I think is worthy of a discussion. Maybe it's bigger than a nugget. Maybe everyone is focusing on this, but he's talked about a lot. That is where this search is going to actually be different. And it's not just words, it's personnel. The Saints do have a tendency for sameness, for that same routine year after year after year. But like I said, if you want to talk about the tangible difference in this search than the one from 2022, it's who's going to be involved. Yes, there's going to be Mickey. Yes, there's going to be Kai Harley. Yes, there's going to be Michael Parrington. Yes, there's going to be Jeff Ireland. But the additions of former Saints/Dolphins GM Randy Mueller and the addition of Raiders GM Dave Ziegler to the search committee, call it the search committee, definitely intrigues me because they have been willing to say, at least on the surface, we've got to expand the brain trust. We've got to add some more voices to the room. We've got to realize that even if we don't intend to be, we may have a little bit of tunnel vision the way we think, and maybe we need just a little bit of different perspective to be added. To me, that's significant, and this is under the best of circumstances. Hopefully, it can change or force the necessary change this organization needs. I just want to break from the collective, call it groupthink. That has a negative connotation, but the collectivism that inevitably comes when a lot of people work together for a long period of time. Sometimes that's awesome because that's great chemistry, but when it's not going well, that chemistry can just turn into just repetition, and like we always say, the definition of insanity, same thing over and over, expecting a different result. So adding two voices that are well-respected around the NFL, it's crazy that Randy Mueller is back to the organization, given the way things ended with him here years ago. He's back, and I don't know what his official role is. And then Dave Ziegler was a guy that he had a big-time level of respect when it came to personnel. I'm not sure when it comes to coaching, because I think when he was with the Raiders, he had Josh McDaniels. I don't know if he hired him or if that was already set by the time he got there. But nonetheless, two well-respected guys that have seen a lot of different ways of doing things when it comes to football. At one point, the Saints way, call it, the New Orleans Saints way of doing things was the hottest thing in the NFL. It ain't anymore. And maybe, just maybe, they're starting to realize that on Airline Drive. And if you're going to embrace the change, I've always believed you can say whatever you want, but the actions speak louder than words. And to me, adding two new voices to the mix is going to carry some significant weight. That's a small step in that at least you're willing to try something different. I don't know if it's be good or bad, but at least it's different. Because failing the same way, that's just so annoying to me. Like, at least this is something different. So now you still got to go out and get the right coach, and you still got to find the right guy. But at least the process they'll take to get to that candidate will include some fresh perspective. It is so needed in this organization. Like I said before, at no point during the 43-minute press conference did I come away feeling great about the state of things. Loomis isn't exactly an exciting guy to begin with. Y'all know this. I'm not saying anything new. And frankly, he didn't say much. He never really does. But I do think being willing to listen to some new voices from people that haven't been with the organization for a long time, like Mueller and Ziegler up until this past year, is at least an intriguing development that will make this search a little bit different. And I think you can't ask for much more than that because they're not going to do crazy wholesale changes when it comes to who's making all the decisions. But adding a few more voices to the mix, I think, was a slightly good thing.
I agree with you. The Saints do need a fresh perspective and a fresh approach, really. And bringing in two names that are capable of doing that, I think, will help. Now, when I was listening to Mickey Loomis talk,
lay it on us.
I took one major thing out of it. Loomis has a little bit of politician in him, in the sense of he will address what he wants to address. He will not talk about what he doesn't want to talk about. Now, the major problem with that is everything Loomis didn't want to talk about, to me, came across as some of the biggest things you would want to know out of him. When I listened to Mickey Loomis talk, there was one pattern, and that was him ducking questions. He ducked so many important questions, starting with one of the first ones. It was a report that came out after they fired Dennis Allen, the report saying that Gail Benson was kind of the one who drove that decision. They asked Mickey Loomis about that. He completely drove left and said, you know what, I really don't want to get into that. It was, quote, an organizational decision, and I'm part of the organization.
Well, that tells you all you need to know.
Exactly. Right. That does not sound like somebody who was on the same page with letting go Dennis Allen, So instead of attacking that question head on, he drives around it. They asked him about Derek Carr's salary hit, which is one of the biggest storylines when it comes to the Saints. Derek Carr's salary, his cap hit. How are the financials going to work if you bring him back? If you want to let him go, how are the financials going to work? He drove around the salary question, and it's like, man, that's why we're talking to you, the general managers, to learn these things. They asked him about specific players on the roster, and he kept going back to, where we've been so busy with this coaching search, we really haven't had a chance to do roster evaluation. Now, to me, you had 17 games of roster evaluation, but, apparently...
He's going to do the same thing at the Senior Bowl. He does it every year. The first time he talks about it, he does the exact same thing.
Apparently, he hasn't seen enough of the team to be able to evaluate it, which is something that most fans and people watching the team frequently don't say, but, hey, he hasn't seen enough to evaluate the roster. Somebody asked him, looking at this roster, do you still feel like this can be an elite team in the NFL? Another question. He drove around. That's what people want to hear from you, Mickey. If they are, if you believe that this can still be an elite roster, say that. Maybe you can convince some of your fan base into thinking that as well. If you don't, no, I don't think we have what it takes to be an elite roster, and it's my job to get us back to that point. I have no problem with that. They asked him, hey, going into the offseason, potentially $60 million over the cap. How do you navigate that? Drove around that question. He says, you know what? Yeah, we're over the cap, but we have the most players on the roster signed in the NFL. We've got 61 players on the roster. So, there's people who are under the cap, but they only have 40-something players on the roster. And it's like, I see what you're trying to do, but that's not the point. It's the fact that you're going into the offseason a lot of money over the cap, and we're trying to figure out how you plan to fix it. They asked him about moving past the Sean Payton era, which is something that the Saints have not been able to successfully do ever since Sean Payton left. And he goes on to say, well, I don't really know what the Sean Payton era is. How do you define the Sean Payton era? And then he continues on and says, well, look at what's going on in Denver with a former Saints guy. Look at what's going on in Detroit with a former Saints guy. Look how well they've built their organizations with people who we grew. Part of the problem, Mickey, the reason that we're here at 5-12 is because you have not been able to build the organization in the way that they did in Denver and the way that they did in Detroit. And it reminded me of, we're talking about him ducking questions. If we want to be honest with it, he kind of ducked the media after firing Dennis Allen as well. When it comes to addressing the hard topics head on, Mickey Loomis lately has shown a tendency to not do that and to choose to, drive around those speed bumps instead. And that was the biggest takeaway from the press conference for me.
I was just thinking, we had that weird parking lot encounter where like we were gonna talk to him, then we didn't, then we were, and we wouldn't. And that was the closest any of us came in a group-ish setting to talk to him since the DA fires. This was the first time he stepped in front of the microphone in a group setting. He did that WWL AM radio or FM, whatever it is. Radio hit. I don't know. Did he continue doing it throughout the season? I know he was doing it on Tuesdays, I believe. But I think the last time we heard from him was the first day of training camp.
Yeah, as a group, yeah.
First day of training camp. That is an insane amount. Now, look, to be fair, GMs don't normally do weekly press conferences in the NFL unless you fire a coach. They don't normally do, things like that. So it's not out of the ordinary to not hear from him during the season. But when you fire a coach, obviously you would expect someone from the front office to acknowledge that. Instead, it was in the interim and a couple of New Orleans natives. So this was the first time we heard from him. Nothing new. It's funny, the way you're talking about him ducking questions, not really revealing too much. It's Mickey. I mean, that's just that's him. I mean, that's just. I mean, like you said, you could it could be the most positive, uplifting. Like you answer this question, and it's gonna like make you look like a star. And he just kind of downplays it. It's just that's the way he's always handled those type of press conferences. I don't know if it's just his natural tendency to just not to be somewhat secretive, or if it's just his personality. He just doesn't quite feel the need to have to show his personality to the media. I don't know. I don't really care. I do know this. You and I probably agree here. I don't feel any kind of way about the organization that I didn't feel at the end of the season. This is an organization that has to make a lot of very good moves to get back to where they want to be, and there's no guarantee those moves are going to be the correct ones, but you have to make them. So I thought the Derek Carr situation, because he spoke very high of Derek Carr, but then there was also talk about the new head coach implementing his vision. So have they already? So they have not made a decision on Carr, and they're going to wait for the head coach's vision to see what they do with Carr. Is that going to be a big decision? But if you do the Derek Carr thing and you move on, there are massive decisions that you have to make. Otherwise, from salary cap, where you're restructuring basically your entire roster or a lot of them just to get on the salary cap. So is it new? Are you trying to find someone that has a vision with Derek Carr, has a vision without Derek Carr? I was left not confused because I didn't expect him to be concrete about that, but the way he left that door open, which could have been easily said, he's coming back next year, I thought was certainly interesting. He didn't get into specifics about any other player. Derek Carr was the main one he talked about, what he was asked directly about. So I don't know. I mean, it still remains very much a state of flux, very much we can't really go far in our offseason plan until we hire the right head coach.
Exactly.
And it reminds me a little bit of when a former head coach, Sean Payton, left. He left, but that wasn't the end of it. The following offseason, he still was out interviewing for jobs. You had to get that trade to see what you had. It felt like the entire organization was just hung up for a couple of weeks. I remember Senior Bowl, it finally broke that he got on with the Denver Broncos, and it finally unlocked the rest of the offseason. Hopefully that happens here. I know some of this is more of the deliberate nature of the NFL hiring process, but nothing what he said Monday, Mickey, is going to make anyone feel better. That what will make people feel better is, frankly, who are you hiring? And right now, after watching the end of the season, the last game of the regular season with the Lions and Vikings, you saw Aaron Glenn excel. And then I'm watching the Buffalo Bills yesterday, and I'm seeing Joe Brady call a masterful game where it's against his former Saints head coach, by the way, where they dominated, ball control, held the ball for like 46 minutes, whatever it was. He dominated. He's a candidate. And then I watched Cliff Kingsbury last night. He even tweeted, it's not just Jaden is really good. Jaden's freaking awesome, and he's so much further along than where I thought he would be because Cliff Kingsbury is so in sync with what Jaden does well and when to call things and how to design plays to make it work. That is a perfect marriage. So I thought 3 names linked to this job all just up their resume of the final game of the regular season and into wild card weekend.
Yeah, and that's what's really the news is going to be moving forward is who is going to be that head coach. And unfortunately, I don't know if there's one name that will make everybody happy. You can kind of pick and prod at each one of them, whether it's Aaron Glenn, who's done a great job in Detroit, but he's also a Dennis Allen disciple.
Right.
Some people may not want him because of that. Joe Brady, young, up-and-coming, creative guy. He's doing really good in Buffalo. He failed in Carolina. Is he ready for this job now? He doesn't have a lot of experience doing what the Saints are going to want him to do.
Does he have the presence you need?
Exactly. And then you look at Cliff Kingsbury. You could criticize maybe what he did in Arizona. He was never able to necessarily take Kyler Murray off the ground and turn him into that top 10 quarterback that he was drafted number 1 overall to be. So it's going to be really interesting to see kind of the direction. And we really didn't get much from Mickey today on what exactly he's looking for when it comes to the head coaching search. Now, one thing he did give us, and that's what I expected from him, and he did say there were a lot of, I don't know if you want to call it excuses. I call it excuses, but there were a lot of injury excuses, and the injury bug bit really hard. A lot of relevant players for the Saints got hurt. You can definitely say, this would have been a completely different team if they stayed healthy, but he really laid it on heavy with the injury thing.
He definitely did. But to me, that's what do you do from here? Because there are certain things you have to look at. I mean, I don't know if it's a medical staff thing. I don't know if it's a training thing. I don't know if it's a strength and conditioning thing. I've even heard whispers or rumors or just talk a little bit about the surface at the indoor facility. I mean, could that be an issue? When you look at some of the soft tissue things they had in practice, was that an issue? I mean, if you're the Saints, everything has got to be looked at. Anything that could impact negatively the overall health of your players that can be somewhat controlled, you have to be willing to change that, and they will be. You just hopefully identify the right things, and that's certainly something that they will do. I do think this. I've once called Mickey Loomis, this is in years past. This is when they were successful. I said he can be, because they used to have a lot of free agent signings that were big deals in the offseason.
Yeah,
I used to call him painfully patient. He kind of alluded to that today. I'm overly patient at times. Maybe I need someone a little more proactive. That was a little bit of self-awareness. I certainly was. At least he understands that. He also said, when we talked about the positives about this job, he said, I'm not selling this job, which I understand. You don't want to be desperate. You don't want to be in a position where you come across as a desperate franchise, desperate for someone to save them. You want to present some form of strength when you're going out there. It's 1 of 32, but he said stability with ownership in the organization for a very long time are the positive attributes in the passionate fan base. It ain't hard to figure out what you would sell, or not sell, but what would stand out about this job. The question is, what candidates realize that and would be, you know what, I value that more than maybe a franchise quarterback on the roster right now, but it might have murky ownership. What candidate would stand out? Because when they finally take this job, whoever that is, that's going to be one of the reasons why they take it.
Yeah, I mean, and the answer to that would be a guy who doesn't have a better option, for whatever reason, whether that guy is Joe Brady, because Joe Brady has no head coaching experience. Joe Brady really doesn't have a lot of experience being an offensive coordinator. So, if you were to bring Joe Brady in, there may not be a lot of teams around the league who are looking to elevate Joe Brady to that level. Part of the reason the Saints are doing so is because Joe Brady is familiar with Louisiana, familiar with the city of New Orleans, and familiar with the community. He's been here before. Aaron Glenn, somebody's going to hire Aaron Glenn, but would they necessarily give him the control he might get coming to, again, an organization that he's familiar with? I feel a lot better about their chances about coming to New Orleans than I do about maybe a Mike McCarthy, somebody who has a resume. Cliff Kingsbury, somebody who is in a very good position right now with Jaden Daniels. And if he keeps eating on offense with Jaden for the next year or two, he could have an even higher profile job than the Saints.
But let me just say this. If Kingsbury takes the interview, that's a step in the right direction. Because, somebody like that's not going to take every interview because he's smart enough to understand that not every situation is going to be great for me. So I'm not going to waste my time with a situation that I don't want. He played here for a year, which is funny because he was here, I believe. No, it wasn't Mueller. Mueller had already been fired. But it was part of that Hazlitt window. And, Mueller obviously had Hazlitt. Hazlitt's offensive coordinator was Mike McCarthy, man. So
crazy how many people have
I can
ties.
see the Saints being very interested in Mike McCarthy, and if he takes an interview, and that interview could be in person,
Yeah, Cowboys are not in the playoffs.
That would certainly be an interesting development. So, I mean, we move forward into an off season of unknown. You didn't get much more out of the more concrete detail out of the search going forward after today's press conference.
Is there anything that you wanted to hear from Loomis that he didn't give us today?
trying to think. Spoke about a lot of things. I have such a low expectation of information in Loomis press conferences because it's just I've been around too many, and it's kind of a joke, and he even jokes with us about it. But that press conference generally gives us a little bit more than the pre-draft press conference, which you don't want to give away your plans at the pre-draft press conference, which makes sense. But I thought it didn't really reveal a whole lot. One thing. I didn't need to hear this, but he was pretty emphatic in saying it. He said retirement is not on his mind, which is based off everything I've heard. That's accurate. He's not retiring. He wants to fix it. And, he said, when asked, what gives you, why are you confident you can turn it around? He said, because I've done it before, or we've done it before. And, he has. And look, 2005 was a way worse situation than they are currently in right now. But it was one of those quick flips, and it was you didn't necessarily have to use the word rebuild because they were already 10-6 1 year later. So that's probably what he's looking at in terms of avoiding the rebuild word. And also, he's 68 years old. He doesn't want to spend an eternity rebuilding because you rebuild. He doesn't have that many seasons left, obviously. When you talk about being Saints general manager, so that's really what it was. So that's kind of where I stand with the Loomis presser.
I don't know how the Saints fans in general feel about this, but I'm tired of hearing about 05, 06. Mm-hmm. You struck gold with Sean Payton. Mm-hmm. You struck gold with Drew Brees. It was a long time ago. Now, can you do it again?
That's it.
In sports, it comes down to what have you done for me lately? Mm-hmm. And lately, the Saints organization hired Dennis Allen, who was not the right candidate because you fired him 2.5 years later. You brought in a lot of quarterbacks and made a lot of roster decisions and draft picks that weren't necessarily the best thing to do in the situation. So I don't care about what you did 2 decades ago. What are you going to do for me now?
I agree. I think this whole organization hopefully is out of their nostalgic thunder and ready to win in the present tense. All right, we got to get out of here. For Andre Johnson Jr., I am Sean Fazende. We will catch you guys next time on Overtime.